Out of sight among a tangle of poplar and maple shoots, my dogs search the cover. I stand above them in the logging road, listening to their bells and letting my mind wander. From the edge of an abandoned logging yard, I can see an old one-room schoolhouse miles away in the valley below, its back against the black northern forest. A stream meanders lazily northward, up the open vale, hidden most of the way beneath the elms and willows flanking its banks. In dark green pastures cows graze, as they have for almost 300 years. The ancient white farmhouses and enormous weathered barns, now owned by a preservation trust, stand between the emerald fields and dark wooded hills that roll onto the horizon. The singing of a logging truck's tires on the highway below brings me back to the present. Kara, my older German wire-haired pointer, pops out of the brambles to make certain I'm still paying attention, and then she disappears from sight again on the uphill side of the road. Colby, the younger wirehair, sounds like she is quite far down the slope. A few yellow and orange leaves still cling to scattered branches, but most have blown off, opening up vistas impossible to see only a few weeks earlier. Distant hills are a patchwork of old logging activity. If I live to be 100, there will still be miles left unexplored. Kara is not far from the edge of the logging road, where leggy balsam firs stand in moss and rocks above their seedling young, her nose gulping air and her head sorting out things that I can only imagine. The tail a blur. She gallops into the road with a look of authority and freezes, her nose pointing at a bulldozed-up pile of limbs and tree trunks, all weathered to a silvery grey. Hurrying toward the rubble, I hear Colby's bell approaching from down the hill and worry that the young dog might bump the bird. But then her bell goes silent too, not honouring the older dog that she cannot see, but pointing scent on her own from the far side of the debris. 2 more steps and the grouse explodes skyward. Reflexes twist my body at the waist to make a prayer shot almost straight up. A long history. Partridge have a long history in New England. Unless you grew up here, it is best to call them ruffed grouse, because you'll never get the accent right. A Vermonter says partridge a bit differently than a down Mainer does, but each listens to the other without breaking into a smirk. I'm not certain that is true when people who were raised outside of New England attempt to say patridge. When the Pilgrims first landed, the heath hen provided a much easier dinner, and the turkey a much larger meal. The heath hen was so easy to collect that there are stories of servants asking not to be fed them more than a few times a week. Much of southern New England, up as far north as parts of central New Hampshire, was open pastures when the first Europeans arrived. Frequent burning by the Native Americans, who lived in a primitive agricultural society, created the open country necessary for the eastern prairie chicken. Europeans on cod fishing expeditions left behind diseases that the Indians had never experienced. By the time the Puritans landed in Plymouth, possibly 2/3 of the Indian population had perished from illness. Entire villages vanished. When the Puritans wandered ashore, they found already cleared land waiting to be used, which they took as a sign from God. The first Indians to greet the Pilgrims were Wampanoag. They immediately recognized the superior advantage of the European weapons and allied themselves with the new arrivals. The Mohawk from northern New York had been threatening from the west, and their ancient rivals, the Narragansett from the south. The weakened Wampanoag needed an advantage. Little did they know that in a few short years they would be engaged in the bloodiest war that Americans would ever fight, brought on over disputes over land ownership. Atrocities were committed on both sides, and a full third of the population, both European and native, would die before the Wampanoag chief Metacomet was shot and killed by another Indian. In Medfield, the town I grew up in, 2/3 of the homes were burned to the ground. Luckily, a torch tossed through the window of my family's homestead did not set the building afire, and the place still stands today. The new Americans kept the land open, building towns ever westward, with the population growing by the addition of new arrivals in numbers the old Americans never could have imagined. Hunting for most of the pious New Englanders meant putting food on the table, so the easier heath hen remained a staple until its numbers started to decline in the late 1800s. Likely the ruffed grouse of the 17th century were less fearful of man than the birds of today. I'm sure an occasional bird ended up in the pot, but I doubt they were ever advertised for dinner until the bird was in hand. With much of the land kept open, there was less ruffed grouse cover than in coming years when the farmers started to abandon the area for greener pastures to the west. And then the Industrial Revolution brought wealth that allowed free time, as well as much better firearms. After more than 200 years of removing the dumb and the slow from the gene pool, the New England grouse had become a most sporting game bird. Recreational hunting blossomed. In the late 1800s and early years of the 20th century, as the rural human population migrated from the farms to the cities, the abandoned land turned to weeds and then sprouted trees, providing thousands of acres of early successional forests. Following the Civil War, Maine had 6.5 million acres of active farmland. Slightly more than a century later, by 1980, that had shrunk to 1.5 million plowed and open acres. To the south, before the First World War, Massachusetts was 20% wooded and 80% open pastures. 100 years later, Mother Nature had worked hard at reversing those numbers nearly exactly. Along the way, she created spectacular ruffed grouse habitat, the storybook stuff preserved in classic paintings by the likes of the Bay State's Aidan Lassell Ripley and Vermont's Ogden G. Pleisner. Two well-known New Englanders, Burton L. Spiller and William Harnden Foster, wrote eloquently about bird hunting during that period. Both were born in 1886 and lived during a period when old abandoned farms were reverting to young forest. Grouse populations likely were higher during that time than ever before, or ever will be again. Spiller grew up in coastal Maine and was given his first shotgun, an old 10-gauge hammer gun, at the age of 10. His stories recount tales of an era we will never see repeated, yet offer bird hunting wisdom that is still applicable today. Spiller's book Drummer in the Woods, 1962, is an excellent read, in which he tells how, as a young man, he hunted with an old market hunter, but soon learned the difference between mere killing and sport. William Harnden Foster studied at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and lived in Andover, Massachusetts. He was an avid waterfowl as well as upland hunter, and invented and popularized the sport of skeet as a way to keep shooting skills sharp between grouse seasons. Foster painted dog portraits and hunting scenes, and his paintings were used on the cover of L.L. Bean catalogs. His crowning achievement was the book New England Grouse Shooting, 1942, which he not only wrote but filled with beautiful illustrations. The book has long been out of print, but used copies can still be found. But after all has been said and done, wrote Foster, with a tip of his cap to the thrill of the bobwhite covey rise, the magical whistle of the woodcock, the raucous ringneck, when it comes to native wariness, individual daring and resourcefulness, power, cunning, and all those things that place one creature above another, physically and mentally, then we must turn to our native patronage. I should say our native grouse, as known to those who have seen him at his best. He is the king of American game birds, and so those who have hunted them all will attest. Every serious grouse hunter should have both Foster and Spiller on his or her shelves. Later, William G. Tapley, whose father wrote Field and Stream's beloved Tap's Tips and was a close hunting buddy of Spiller, wrote of the joys of grouse and hunting as spreading suburbia chased him from Massachusetts to central New Hampshire. As a kid, his father used to take him hunting with Spiller. Eventually, Tapley ended up with Spiller's beloved 20-gauge Parker. His telling of the story reveals much about both Spiller and New England ways. The books and magazine articles I read as a child made it sound like abandoned farms were the only place where we would ever find ruffed grouse. So during my younger years, I spent as much time looking for proverbial abandoned farmland as I did the bird. We may never see the hunting that the great writers saw, but today parts of New England, particularly in the north, still have excellent hunting. Talk to hunters who chased grouse on Cape Cod during the 1950s and 60s, and you'll hear stories about grouse exploding into the air at their every third step. That may be an exaggeration, but I remember plentiful grouse when I first started hunting in the late 1960s. Much of Cape Cod was then still rural. Stunted young forests struggled to grow in the sandy soil, and beneath them bullbriar and poison ivy flourished. That thick understory provided excellent hiding and abundant food where ruffed grouse, bob-white quail, and cottontail rabbits thrived. Little did we know that the whippoorwill, which we heard every night, shared the love for the same young forest as did the game. Today, hearing a whippoorwill is a rare song. None of us had dogs in those days. Pushing through the brush flushed more than enough birds to keep us interested. My first hunting dog, a beagle, would disappear into the thickets in the morning and not emerge until late in the day, usually shredded by briars to the point where he would whimper when you patted him. We would try our best to follow, yet rarely got shots at either rabbits or birds. The next day, that dog would dive into the tangle again with renewed enthusiasm. The first ruffed grouse that I clearly remember killing flushed from a thicket of bullbriar beside a sandy Cape Cod tote road. My brother Jim walked with me, and as we passed the bird, it bolted skyward. It dropped on my shot. Jim said he was surprised he had hit it. I said that I did. When we cleaned the bird later, we found 2 sizes of lead pellets. We had both fired at the same moment. In the woods behind my childhood home, just 18 miles from the city of Boston, ruffed grouse often exploded from blown-down trees or thickets when we played in the woods. A childhood memory sticks of one that flew into our kitchen window on a suicide mission. By the time I reached high school, though, the suburbs were spreading westward fast. Of course, during those teenaged years, the arrival of new girls in town outweighed the loss of the woods that I loved. Growing up in New England, you absorb traditions subconsciously until they become part of who you are. Somehow the effort and discomfort that usually goes with grouse hunting blends with the old Puritan ethics. We are taught that anything worth doing is probably difficult, and the greater the difficulty, the more rewarding the end. Grouse hunting fits that description perfectly. Henry David Thoreau wrote, "The price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it." After all the walking involved, some grouse are worth quite a lot. A kaleidoscope of leaves. The land is flatter on the uphill side of the road, and my girls and I loosely follow the edge of the softwoods. Maples or yellow birch stand in clusters, left behind as too small to market by the last loggers. Poplar shoots abound everywhere, mixed with raspberry vines and maple sprouts. It hasn't rained lately, yet the bony ground is damp beneath moss, ferns, and waist-high sprouting trees. Cara is birdie amongst boulders and knee-high firs. A grouse bolts into the sky from the top of the largest boulder, which is about the size of a van and thickly covered with baby fir trees, like green hair on a granite head. That has happened before. I easily imagine the birds hopping up there as they hear the dog approaching. We move on and the dogs point 2 more grouse, both of which flush wild ahead of my footsteps. Beneath a cluster of wrist-size poplars, on very wet and almost bare ground, there are white splashes indicating woodcock. Then 3 woodcock are pointed within a small area. Each behaves nicely with 2 ending up in the game bag. The land to our right becomes steep enough to pinch us back to the logging road. At the northernmost reaches of New England, opening day coincides with the brightest fall foliage. The colors are something for which New England is justly famous. The shooting is difficult, with birds disappearing almost immediately into the kaleidoscope of leaves. But the scenery is spectacular. Reds, yellows, and golds layer the hillsides. The dry, crisp air smells sweetly of decaying leaves and drying grasses. Wild apples are free for the picking. In some areas, trout season remains open the first week or 2 of bird season, creating a sportsman's cornucopia. Most mornings are cool, some with a frost. By midday, the temperature climbs, sometimes to the point of warm. The grouse can be hard to find when the temperatures are high, the dogs may overheat, and none of our grouse hunting garb is really comfortable when the weather is hot. Woodcock are scattered up on the hillsides, rather than clustered in the alder bottoms. During these Indian summer days, it sure feels like there are a lot more miles of walking between birds. A shady spot under an ancient rock maple, well up on a hill with a view of mountains, or a faraway village, preferably with a stream nearby to water the dog, is a perfect place to sit with a friend to reminisce or, my favorite, nap with the dogs. When the sun settles a bit and the air has started to cool, it's time to follow the streams down into the valleys. Here the air has been cooler all day, and the grouse have spent their time sitting on the shady branches of softwood trees. With luck, your dog will find birds coming down to feed in the late afternoon shadows. Apple trees might be anywhere. Along with lichen-covered stone foundations, they mark the last vestige of the long-gone farms. Birds and animals carry the seeds in their stomachs and deposit them out in the middle of nowhere. Up the hill from our camp, a straggly 20-foot apple tree clings to the side of a hill, where no farm ever could have been within a mile in any direction. Their leaves stay green almost until they drop, making them easy to spot from a distance. The quantity of wild fruit varies widely between years. Certain trees attract grouse while others are ignored. If you taste the apples, you'll probably understand why. Some are so bitter they almost bite back. During the first weeks of the season, it is always worth working the dogs beneath those old trees. The town is small, not much more than a post office, a combination sporting goods hardware store, and a gas station grocery store. At both ends are tiny churches. Smack in the middle is a restaurant, complete with bar and pool table in the basement. In front of an old red brick building hangs a big Husqvarna sign with a picture of a chainsaw. Logging trucks are parked at the restaurant and along the street. Where the town peters out near the river, there is a small motel that turns on the neon no vacancy sign for the entire month of October. It is chock full of bird hunters. Serious grouse hunters, the kind who keep dogs and plan their lives around bird seasons, have probably never been too abundant. Come fall, travel to the land of logging, and you'll find them in numbers. Logging trucks rumbling through town roused me from my bed. Bird hunting, unlike deer hunting, starts at a reasonable hour. There is plenty of time for breakfast after the dogs stretch their legs. Before entering the restaurant, I walk them through the field at the end of the parking lot next to the dark river that rushes by on the way to the Gulf of Maine. At the register inside, I make small talk with other hunters, and we all lie about where we've been hunting. Most do not admit to finding many birds. I just keep my mouth shut. The drive from town takes me across the river and up a long incline to hunt an alder patch that seems the same as it did almost 40 years before. The slow transformation makes it seem unchanged, but on close observation there are poplars there, larger than my forearm, sticking above the alders. They couldn't have been 3 decades ago, or they would be enormous trees by now. I once thought this place had been abandoned farmland, but old stumps 3 feet across show that it was once logged for timber. An occasional fence post and rocks thrown into giant piles indicate that some determined soul once tried to do more with the land than simply grow trees. The endless crop of stones had to be discouraging. In the valley beyond, softwoods stretch out for miles until hardwood-covered hills and mountains climb to meet the streaked autumn sky. This is logging country. Except for a few houses near the northernmost part of the valley, the landscape is unbroken wilderness. Who says you can't get away from it all in the crowded east? The dogs are excited, and I choose to hunt them both. Almost immediately the alders, red-twig dogwood, and tall grasses swallow them up. So I follow the chime of their bells. Melting frost has everything soaked. Soon I am hot and perspiring. Kara's bell goes silent. A woodcock flushes on my approach and instantly disappears into the leaves. We circle to the right, searching for a pair of remembered apple trees. Colby finds another woodcock on wet ground, littered with fallen fruit. At the flush, my gun fires, powered by reflex, and the bird disappears into the leaves. Calling Kara in, both dogs search, and Kara finds the dead bird. I smooth the feathers to admire the colors. Both dogs are in overdrive, so I stuff the bird in my vest and follow. We hunt to the east, searching for a small stream that tumbles down from the road. Leaves cling to my wet clothes. Moving 3 steps without ducking under or stepping over something is impossible. The dogs move easily, though, passing under most of the obstructions while I struggle to keep up. We find the brook beneath tall softwood trees, following it through small openings in the forest that are full of shoulder-high grass. The thunder of wings tells us a grouse has departed down the hill, and then another one leaves unseen. Lichen-covered stone walls. By the 3rd week of October, most of the leaves are off in the north, and the band of bright foliage has moved south to central and southern New England. This is the time of year for which the hardcore bird hunters pine. The brood clusters of young grouse have scattered. The shooting is easier, the weather cooler. The ruffed grouse season is open in Massachusetts and Connecticut, where the maple leaves will still be on the trees for a few more weeks. In the southern areas, though, the oaks will have barely started to change to their somber ambers and burgundies. Standing on the naked hillsides of northern New England, villages, homes, and farms dot the valleys. Where a few weeks earlier the leaves hid everything except for the tallest of white steeples. Apple trees may still be green, but most of the fruit is gone, eaten by deer, bears, and grouse. The leaf-peeping tourists have left, leaving the motels and lodges for the bird hunters. Some are closed, waiting for the arrival of the snowmobilers. Most mornings are frosty. Snow isn't unusual in the higher elevations. A sunny day quickly wipes away an early season snow, yet in the long full shadows and on north-facing slopes, the stuff may linger for days. The weather fronts move through faster. Cold, rainy days can make for tough bird hunting, with the grouse waiting out the weather hidden in the shelter of the softwoods. On these days, I often drive back to town for lunch. A steamy bowl of clam chowder or chili is welcome. Some of the best country tests your physical condition, traipsing up the sides of clear cuts, crossing dreadfully irregular ground littered with logs and boulders, or bogs where the ground sucks at your feet. Occasionally you post-hole up to your knee in muck. We all learn to fall gracefully. In places the glaciers scattered boulders with chasms between and newly fallen leaves hide the holes among the rocks. A turned or busted ankle out in the middle of nowhere could be a disaster. Yet there are areas just like in the paintings, golden fields bordered by lichen-covered stone walls or old country lanes winding between blazing sugar maples standing like West Point soldiers. Those are the places where you want to take pictures. If you are serious about finding birds, the good cover is way back in the woods, and often it is rough. Don Julio and I spend the first half of the morning hunting cover along a river that we'd been poking about together off and on for nearly 40 years. It is full of memories, one woodcock and no grouse. The flat river bottom is hemmed in by small mountains, and the winding river's course forms bulbous peninsulas that sometimes provide great hunting. Downstream, a quaint village contains a handful of homes dressed in white clapboards. The dark stream is spanned by a snow-covered bridge, all tucked against a vertical granite cliff. You've seen it on calendars. Back at the truck, Don mentions a place that he's hunted before, far upstream, where the river tumbles down the mountains. It's below a gravel road in the national forest, he says, and a hefty hike in. Nobody that I know spends more time in the woods than Don. If he suggests a place to hunt, it's probably a good one. We drive there and I tuck the truck into the parking spot that he remembers. We hike down an old skid road that skirts the edge of a rebounding cutting and then follow a craggy granite ledge with tall spruce on the top. Where the ledge ends, we cut through rough country, following the edge of more mature timber to our east. It looks like an easy place to get turned around. I'm glad to have Don, with his accumulated woodsman's skills, along as company. When the land finally flattens out, we turn to the right and toward the river. The trees aren't large, maybe as big around as a softball, mostly hardwoods, interspersed with small scattered stands of fir and spruce. In places the wet ground forces detours, but the going is more or less smooth and easy. Kara points. We flush a woodcock. I miss. 2 more take off on the report. Kara makes about 2 steps and points again. 2 more flush, both avoiding the pellets from my gun. For the next half hour, the scene repeats over and over. I have never seen so many woodcock, and boy, do I have a missing streak going. Kara points next to a small clearing. Walking past her, a grouse comes up, almost at my feet, and heads across the opening. I fire as the bird reaches the trees. The way my luck had been going, a miss would not have been a surprise, but Don assures me it fell. Kara finds the bird belly up among fallen leaves. We continue along the rumbling river, losing count of birds pointed and shots fired. I know my shooting problem is firing too soon while the birds are still way too close. I try desperately to slow things down. Focus on the bird, I tell myself, take a breath, and then raise the gun. Nothing seems to work. I finally shoot a woodcock, but hit the bird when it is so near that the shot charge carries away the bird's head. We work back around toward the cutting and into a stand of softwoods where a pair of partridge flush from almost under my feet. They roar off low, and with a lucky crossing shot to my right, I add another to the bag. Thankfully, my shooting seems to be getting back on track. Farther into the softwoods, Kara points another pair of grouse that escape without our ever firing a shot. Ahead and through the trees, I see the clear cut that we hiked next to on the way in. Tired legs do not want to follow those last 2 grouse. After locating the old logging road, we traipse back uphill. My legs are beyond weary. They hurt, but the visit to Shangri-La has certainly been worth it. Chara pointed more birds in a few of hours than she sometimes does in a whole week, or even some seasons. I will never forget. We had traveled far enough from our camp that the drive back takes almost an hour. Things are needed at the grocery store, and Don asks if we are going to shop at the big store or the smaller one. I answer, my legs can't do the bigger store. From A Passion for Grouse, edited by Thomas R. Perot, Wild River Press, www.wildriverpress.com.